Hey, wide awake family. If you see this, it's your sign to smash that like button. Yes, you listening right now. That way YouTube shows you more amazing stories like this one. We love you all. Now enjoy the stories. I met Chris on a Sunday afternoon while I was lounging in my apartment, scrolling through the app with headphones on, half listening to a podcast. His profile was simple, just a few pictures of him hiking, reading, and a casual shot of him holding a coffee cup. Nothing extraordinary, nothing flashy, just approachable. His bio was witty but not trying too hard, the kind that made me think he might actually be funny in real life. I swiped right on a whim, not expecting much. Within minutes, I got a notification. It was a match. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at his profile, thinking maybe this one would be different. We started messaging that evening. Chris had a casual, easy way of talking, like we'd known each other for weeks instead of minutes. He asked about ordinary things like how my day had gone, what I liked to do when I was alone, even what made me feel uncomfortable. It was different from the usual questions people ask. He was curious, genuinely curious, not judgmental, just attentive. I found myself opening up, telling small stories, laughing at dumb things that happened at work, sharing memories from my childhood. It felt normal, comforting, like this could actually be the start of something. After a few days, we decided to meet at a small cafe in the city. Nothing fancy, just warm lighting, wooden tables, and a faint smell of coffee lingering everywhere. I got there first, sat near a window, and watched people pass by. I felt nervous, the kind of nervous that makes your stomach twist, but also feels exciting. When Chris walked in, he looked exactly like his photos. Messy hair, casual clothes, a calm smile. We shook hands, sat down, and started talking. The first hour was perfect. We laughed about movies, shared stories from school, joked about awkward moments, and I felt comfortable, like this wasn't the first time we were meeting with 100th. But then, during casual conversation, Chris mentioned something odd. He told me he had been watching people online for years, like a hobby, analyzing how they communicated, learning from interactions. At first I laughed, thinking he meant he read forums or followed social media trends. But then he got more specific. He casually mentioned that he had actually followed me for a year before we even matched, studying the way I posted, the way I interacted, even things I thought were private. My stomach dropped. My heart raced. I couldn't even form a coherent thought. A year, a full 12 months, and I didn't even know. He explained it casually, almost academically, like it was a research project. He knew where I went on weekends, what caves I liked, the books I read, the events I attended. He claimed he did it out of interest, curiosity, wanting to understand me before we met. It sounded insane, terrifying, violating. I felt like my entire life for the past year had been cataloged by someone I didn't know existed. The casual way he spoke about it made it worse, like this was normal, like every person online could be observed like this. I tried to process it. I asked questions, quietly, carefully, not wanting to provoke a reaction. How did he even know where I lived? How did he know my friends, my habits, my routines? He explained that he had done a lot of research, piecing together information from social media, public records, little patterns in my posts. It was methodical, precise, deliberate. He had spent months learning everything about me before we even exchanged a single word. The casualness of it didn't lessen the horror. It amplified it. During the rest of the date, I felt trapped in a strange mix of fascination and fear. Chris was charming, witty, attentive, but underneath that charm was a meticulous obsession, a calculated surveillance of someone's life. Every small gesture, every habit I mentioned, every laugh and pause, he cataloged mentally, like an experiment in human behavior. The cafe's warm lighting and soft music faded into the background. I was hyper-aware of him, of myself, of the knowledge that my life had been observed without consent for months. After coffee, we walked through the streets, and Chris continued talking, analyzing patterns in my behavior, joking about how he had predicted certain reactions of mine based on posts from months ago. It was unnerving. The casual way he referenced a year of observation made it feel normal in his mind, but in mine, it was terrifying. I realized I was being measured, studied, controlled in a way I had no awareness of until now. Every small movement, every hesitation, every glance he had already accounted for. We ended up at a small park, sitting on a bench under a tree. The air was crisp, leaves rustling around us. Chris casually referenced moments from my life he had observed, from places I had visited to interactions with friends. He didn't ask permission, didn't apologize, just stated facts as if they were common knowledge. I felt a deep sense of violation. This wasn't normal dating. It wasn't casual or fun. It was an intrusion into every small corner of my life, a silent obsession that had been building for 12 months before I even knew it. I tried to steer the conversation to normal topics, movies, hobbies, music, but he kept circling back, analyzing, referencing, commenting on details from my past. It wasn't aggressive, but it was suffocating. He wasn't trying to hurt me, not directly, but the scale of his surveillance, the quiet invasion, made it impossible to relax. I couldn't escape the awareness that every post, every comment, every small digital footprint I left had been traced, analyzed, and remembered. The date ended with a walk back to the train station. I told him I had to leave, needing air, space, freedom from the suffocating intensity of his observation. He smiled, calm, charming, not defensive, not aggressive, but I could feel the weight of that year of surveillance pressing down. It was like a shadow over the day, a constant reminder that someone had known me in ways I hadn't consented to. Walking away, I felt relief mixed with lingering dread. The city felt oppressive, every street and window a reminder of observation, control, and obsession. Back in my apartment, I tried to erase the day from my mind. Deleted messages, blocked him on all platforms, tried to convince myself it was over. But it wasn't. The knowledge that someone had followed me for a full year, piecing together every detail of my life, stayed with me. It wasn't violent, not in a traditional sense, but it was invasive, suffocating, and deeply unsettling. I could imagine how easily it could have escalated, how quickly trust could be manipulated when someone had such a detailed map of my life. Weeks later, I found myself checking my social media habits, wondering how much information I had left exposed, realizing that casual posts, minor comments, and small interactions could be traced, cataloged, and remembered. Chris had changed the way I approach online presence, dating, and privacy. The subtle horror of being watched for a year without knowing it stuck with me, leaving me wary, cautious, hyper-aware. Even months later, the thought of Chris and his year of observation lingered. It wasn't a traditional horror story. It was real, plausible, deeply unsettling because it could happen to anyone who posts online, who interacts casually, who shares snippets of life. The calm, charming demeanor masked something obsessive, invasive, and methodical, a quiet horror hidden behind friendliness. Every time I thought about that date, I remembered the weight of knowing someone had cataloged my life for 12 months. It made casual dating feel precarious, unsafe in subtle ways. The intensity, the obsession, the methodical surveillance left a mark that wasn't easy to shake. It changed the way I interacted online, the way I trusted others, the way I viewed the people behind the screens. The quiet pressure, the obsession disguised as charm, became a lingering shadow in my mind, one that reminded me that some horrors aren't dramatic or violent. They're methodical, patient, and terrifyingly real. I knew something was off before I even met Brian, but it was subtle enough that I ignored it at the time. It started with how quickly he wanted to move things forward. Not in an intense emotional way like some people do, but in a very structured, almost formal way. After just a couple days of messaging, he suggested we meet, which wasn't strange on its own. But then he added that he preferred to verify compatibility properly before investing more time. I didn't think much of it at first. I assumed he just met a normal date. Maybe he was trying to sound more serious than the average person on the app. We agreed to meet at a quiet restaurant, somewhere neutral, nothing too crowded. When I got there, he was already sitting at the table, not on his phone, not distracted, just sitting there with his hands folded like he had been waiting for a while. He stood up as soon as he saw me, greeted me politely, and everything about him seemed normal on the surface. Calm, composed, well-spoken. If anything, he came across as someone who had his life together more than most people I had met on these apps. We sat down, ordered food, and started talking. The first part of the conversation was standard. Work, routines, general interests. He asked questions, but they felt more like an interview than a conversation. Not in an aggressive way, just very direct. He would ask something, listen carefully, then move on to the next question without much reaction. There wasn't much back and forth, no natural flow. It felt like he was going through a list. About 20 minutes in, he leaned back slightly and said something that completely changed the tone of the date. He said he believes in being thorough before getting involved with someone, and that he doesn't like surprises later on. I nodded, not really sure where he was going with it. Then he said he usually does a background check before deciding whether to continue seeing someone. At first, I thought he was joking. I even smiled a little, waiting for him to laugh or clarify. He didn't. He just looked at me calmly and continued explaining, like this was a normal thing people talk about on a first date. He said it wasn't anything illegal or invasive, just public information. Social media, online presence, anything that could give him a better understanding of who someone is beyond what they choose to say. My stomach dropped, but I tried to stay calm. I asked if he had done that with me, hoping he would say no or at least admit it was a joke. Instead, he nodded and said yes, and that he had already gathered enough information to feel comfortable meeting me in person. He said it so casually, like it was no different from checking someone's profile before swiping. But it wasn't the same. This was deeper, more deliberate. He started mentioning things he had found. Places I had been tagged in, old posts I barely remembered, connections between people I knew. None of it was technically private, but hearing it listed out like that made it feel completely different. It felt like parts of my life had been collected and organized without me knowing. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to confront him, tell him it was weird, that it crossed a line, but another part of me didn't want to escalate the situation. He wasn't being aggressive. He wasn't raising his voice or acting defensive. He genuinely believed this was a reasonable thing to do. He kept talking, explaining his reasoning. He said people aren't always honest about who they are, especially online, and that doing research helps him avoid wasting time. He framed it like a practical decision, something logical and efficient. But the more he explained, the more uncomfortable it felt. It wasn't just that he had looked me up. It was how much detail he had gone into. How much effort he had put into building a picture of me before we even met. He asked me if I had ever done the same. I said no, which was true. I might glance at someone's profile, but I don't dig into their life like that. He nodded like he expected that answer and said most people don't, which is why they end up surprised later. The rest of the conversation felt different after that. Every question he asked felt like it was connected to something he already knew, like he wasn't asking to learn, but to confirm. When I answered, I could see him processing it, comparing it to whatever information he had already gathered. I started to feel like I was being measured against a version of myself he had already constructed. At one point, he brought up something from years ago. Something small, something I hadn't thought about in a long time. He mentioned it casually, like it was just another detail, but it hit me in a way I didn't expect. It made me realize how far back he had gone, how much he had looked into. I felt exposed, not because he knew something deeply personal, but because of the way he knew it. Through observation, through piecing things together, through effort I hadn't agreed to. The environment around us started to feel different. The restaurant, the people, the background noise, it all faded into the background. All I could focus on was the conversation and the growing sense that I wasn't in control of how much of myself was being seen. He didn't stop. He kept explaining his process, how he verifies information, how he cross-references details, how he builds a clearer picture of someone before deciding whether to pursue anything further. He spoke about it like it was a system he had refined over time. I realized then that this wasn't something he had just tried once. This was something he did regularly, something he relied on. And that made it worse. Because it meant there were other people, other dates, who had gone through the same thing without knowing. I started thinking about everything I had shared online over the years. Small posts, comments, pictures. Things that felt insignificant at the time, but could be pieced together into something bigger by someone willing to look closely enough. When the food came, I barely touched it. I wasn't hungry anymore. I just wanted to leave, but I didn't want to make a scene or create tension. So I stayed, nodding occasionally, giving short answers, waiting for a moment where it would feel natural to end it. Eventually, the conversation slowed down. He asked if I wanted to continue the evening somewhere else, maybe take a walk or get another drink. I declined, keeping it simple. I said I had to be up early and didn't want to stay out too late. He looked at me for a moment like he was trying to read whether that was true or just an excuse. Then he nodded and said he understood. There was no argument, no pressure, just that same calm, controlled demeanor. We stood up, said goodbye, and went our separate ways. Walking away from that restaurant felt strange. Not dramatic, not intense, just quiet. But the feeling stayed with me. When I got home, I sat down and thought about the entire evening. Not just what he said, but how he said it. How normal it seemed to him. How he had turned something that should be about getting to know someone naturally into something methodical and calculated. I deleted our messages, unmatched him, and tried to move on. But the thing that stuck with me wasn't just that he had looked me up. It was how much he knew before I even had the chance to tell him anything myself. I didn't notice anything strange about Nathan at first because everything about him felt average in the best possible way. He wasn't overly charming, wasn't trying too hard, and didn't come across as rehearsed or intense. Our conversations were steady, nothing groundbreaking, but also not awkward. It felt like talking to someone who just understood how to keep things normal. He didn't rush, didn't overshare, didn't disappear for long periods of time. It was consistent, and that consistency made me trust him without really thinking about it. We talked for about a week before meeting. There was nothing that stood out as a red flag. If anything, I felt relieved that this one might actually be simple. We agreed to meet at a small restaurant. Nothing fancy, just somewhere casual where we could talk without distractions. I got there a few minutes early, sat down, and tried not to overthink it like I usually do. When Nathan arrived, he looked exactly like his pictures. Same relaxed expression, same easy posture. He smiled, sat down, and the conversation picked up right where it had left off online. For the first hour, everything felt normal. We talked about work routines, random things from school. Nothing too deep, but enough to keep it interesting. I remember thinking that this was one of the easiest first dates I'd had in a while. But then something small happened that I didn't fully register at the time. He excused himself to go to the bathroom, leaving his phone on the table. It lit up while he was gone, and I glanced at it without really thinking. It wasn't intentional, just one of those automatic reactions when a screen lights up near you. What I saw didn't make sense at first. It was a message notification, but the name at the top wasn't something I recognized. It wasn't a contact name either, just a username, and the message preview said something like, "You're still logged in here." I didn't think much of it in that moment. People get random messages all the time. I looked away and forgot about it as soon as he came back. The conversation continued like nothing had happened. After we finished eating, he suggested we go for a short walk. It felt natural, so I agreed. The streets were quieter than usual, just a few people passing by, a kind of setting where conversation can either get more personal or slowly fade out. With him, it stayed steady. Not deeper, not more intense, just the same level of calm interaction we had all evening. But then the topic shifted slightly. He started talking about how he believes people present different versions of themselves depending on the situation. That wasn't unusual on its own, but the way he talked about it felt more specific, like he had thought about it a lot. He mentioned how consistency is hard to maintain when you're not fully in control of how you're being perceived. I didn't fully understand what he meant, so I just nodded and asked what he was getting at. That's when he said something that made everything start to feel off. He said sometimes it's easier to share the responsibility. I asked what he meant, and he hesitated for a second before explaining. He said he doesn't always manage his dating profile alone. I thought he meant he had friends helping him pick photos or something like that. People do that sometimes, but that's not what he meant. He said the account is shared. At first, I didn't understand. I thought maybe he was joking, but his tone didn't change. He explained that he and someone else both use the same profile. They both respond to messages, both interact with matches, both take turns depending on availability. I stopped walking for a second because it didn't make sense. I asked him to explain properly, and he did. He said it started as a joke with a friend, something they did for fun, but then they realized it actually worked better than doing it alone. They could keep conversations going more consistently, respond faster, maintain interest without gaps. My mind immediately went back to our messages over the past week. The consistency, the timing, the way replies always seemed balanced. It wasn't one person. It was two. I asked him how long he had been doing this, and he said for a while. Long enough to refine how they communicate so it doesn't seem obvious. I felt this wave of confusion mixed with something else I couldn't fully name. It wasn't anger exactly, but it wasn't neutral either. I asked him if I had been talking to him the whole time. He didn't answer directly. He said mostly, but not always. That made it worse. Because now I didn't know which parts of the conversation were actually him and which parts weren't. I started replaying everything in my head, certain messages that felt slightly different in tone, moments where the conversation shifted in a way I couldn't quite explain at the time. It all started to line up in a way that made me uncomfortable. I asked why he would do that without telling people. He said if people know, it changes how they respond. That answer felt familiar in a way I didn't like. He kept explaining, saying it wasn't about tricking anyone, just making the process more efficient, more engaging. He said most people lose interest quickly, and this way, they could keep things moving without gaps. But that wasn't the point. The point was that I thought I was talking to one person, and I wasn't. The rest of the walk felt different. Every word he said, I questioned. Every expression, every reaction. I couldn't tell what was genuine anymore and what was just part of the system they had built. I started wondering about the other person, who they were, how different they were from him, what they knew about me. Because if they were both reading and responding, then everything I had shared wasn't just between me and him. It was between me and two people I didn't even know. We reached a point where the street split in two directions, and I told him I had to head home. He didn't argue. He just nodded like he understood. That calm reaction made it feel even stranger, like this wasn't unusual for him, like people had probably reacted this way before. I walked away, and for the first time that night, I felt something close to relief. Not because anything dramatic had happened, but because the situation finally made sense in a way I didn't want it to. When I got home, I opened the app and scrolled through our messages again. This time, it felt completely different. I started noticing small inconsistencies, slight changes in tone, in pacing, in the way sentences were structured. Things I hadn't questioned before suddenly stood out. It wasn't obvious enough to catch in the moment. But once you knew, you couldn't unsee it. I realized that for an entire week, I hadn't been building a connection with one person. I had been interacting with something constructed. A shared version of a personality maintained by more than one person, designed to feel consistent but not entirely real. I deleted the conversation after that. Unmatched, removed everything. But the part that stayed with me wasn't just what he told me. It was how normal it felt until I understood it. I didn't think anything of it at first, which is probably the worst part looking back. It started like every other dumb late-night swipe session when I couldn't sleep and had nothing better to do. I remember I was just laying there scrolling, half paying attention, when her profile popped up. Not even in a dramatic way, just another face in the stack. But I stopped. It wasn't even that she looked unreal or anything like that. She just looked normal in a way that felt rare on those apps. Messy hair in one photo, oversized hoodie in another, sitting on the floor with a coffee cup in one where the lighting was kinda bad. It didn't look staged. It looked real. And yeah, she was pretty, but not in a way that screamed fake profile. I swiped right without thinking much about it. We matched almost instantly. That should have been the first thing that felt off, but it didn't. I just figured she was on her phone at the same time. We started messaging, and it felt easy, like weirdly easy. She didn't take forever to reply, but she also wasn't glued to the chat. The pace felt normal. She didn't ask anything weird either, just basic stuff. What I did for work, what music I liked, dumb little things. I remember feeling like I got lucky for once. After maybe an hour of talking, she asked for my number. I gave it to her. Again, no hesitation. We moved to texting, and that's when things started getting a little strange, but still not enough for me to stop. She started sending photos. Not like anything bad, just random snaps of her day. One of her sitting on her bed with her laptop, another of her holding a mug, one of her shoes, kicked off near a couch. Just casual stuff. It felt normal, like she was trying to make it more real than just texting. I sent a couple back too. Nothing special. Just my desk at work, my car, stuff like that. I work late shifts, so most of this was happening while I was at work. I remember checking my phone during a break when she sent the first photo that actually made me pause. It was a picture of a kitchen. At first glance, it didn't even register. Just a counter, a sink, a kettle. Normal. But something about it stuck in my head. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Then I shrugged it off. A lot of kitchens look the same. I even told myself that while I went back to work. We kept talking. She sent another photo maybe 20 minutes later. This one was of a living room, a couch, a coffee table, a tab on the wall. The lighting looked dim, like it was late afternoon or early evening. Again, nothing crazy. But this time I felt it stronger. That weird feeling like I'd seen it before. I zoomed in on the photo. The table had a scratch in the corner. The couch had this small dent in one of the cushions. I had that exact dent in my couch. I remember just staring at my phone, feeling kind of stupid, like I was trying to convince myself of something that wasn't there. I even opened my camera roll and looked at an old photo I had in my living room. It looked similar, but not exactly the same. I told myself I was reaching. I put my phone away and tried to ignore it. Then she sent another one. This time was a hallway, narrow, with a coat hanging on a hook, a pair of shoes on the floor near the wall. My chest dropped. Those were my shoes. Not just the same kind. Mine, same scuffs on the sides, same worn-out laces. I didn't even realize I'd stopped breathing for a second. I just sat there staring at it while everything started clicking together in the worst way. I went back to the kitchen photo. Then the living room. I started noticing things I missed before. The exact pattern on the counter. The small chip on the wall near the TV. Stuff I'd never paid attention to until that moment. It was my apartment. Every single photo she sent was taken inside my apartment, while I was at work. I remember checking the time. I still had 2 hours left on my shift. My hands felt cold and I couldn't think straight. I wanted to believe there was some explanation that didn't involve someone being inside my place. Maybe old photos. Maybe she used to live there. That was the only thing that made any sense. I asked her about it. I tried to keep it casual, like I wasn't freaking out. Just mentioned the place looked familiar. Waited for her to say something normal, something that would make it all make sense. Her reply came quick. She said she liked my place. I stared at that message for a long time. I didn't respond. My brain was trying to piece together how that was even possible. I hadn't told her my address. I barely told her anything about where I live except the general area. There was no way she could have found my exact apartment from that. Another photo came through. This one made my stomach drop harder than anything before. It was my bedroom. My bed, unmade exactly how I left it that morning. My jacket thrown over the chair. Even my charger hanging off the side of the nightstand. And in the corner of the photo, barely visible, was the edge of a mirror. And in that mirror, there was movement. Not clear, not detailed, just enough to see that someone was there holding the phone. I left work early. Didn't even explain it properly. Just grabbed my stuff and went. The whole drive back felt wrong, like I was heading towards something I didn't want to see. I kept checking my phone at red lights. More photos kept coming. Bathroom, closet, my front door from the inside. The last one before I got there was the worst. It was taken from my bed, facing the door. Like someone was laying where I slept. When I got to my building, everything looked normal. Lights on in other apartments, nothing out of place. I stood outside my door for a minute, just listening. Nothing. No sound at all. I unlocked it slowly. The inside looked exactly how I left it. Nothing moved. Nothing missing. Nothing broken. I checked every room. Empty. Completely empty. My heart was still racing, but at the same time I felt stupid again. Like I just worked myself up over nothing. Maybe it was some kind of trick. Maybe someone had photos from before I moved in. I didn't know. I went to my room last. Everything looked the same as in the photo. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm down. That's when my phone buzzed again. I looked at it. It was another photo from her. My hands started shaking before I even opened it. It was a picture of me, sitting on my bed, taken from behind. I slowly turned my head toward the closet. The door was slightly open, just enough to see darkness inside. I didn't move for what felt like forever. I couldn't. My body just locked up while my brain tried to catch up with what I was seeing. My phone buzzed again. Another photo. This time closer. Closer to me. Like whoever was in there had stepped out. I didn't check the closet. I grabbed my keys and left. Didn't pack anything, didn't turn anything off. I just walked out and kept walking until I was outside again. I never went back in after that. I stayed at a friend's place for a while. Told him a watered-down version of it because saying the whole thing out loud made it sound insane. I reported it, but nothing came of it. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints they could use, nothing missing. Just photos on my phone that I eventually deleted because I couldn't stand looking at them. Her number stopped working the next day. Profile gone too. Like she never existed. I still don't know how she got in. I changed apartments a month later. New place, new locks, everything. But sometimes when I'm at work late, I still get that feeling. Like if I checked my phone at the wrong moment, there'd be a photo waiting, taken before I got home. I didn't think anything of it at first, which is probably the worst part looking back. It started like every other dumb late night swipe session when I couldn't sleep and had nothing better to do. I remember I was just laying there scrolling, half paying attention, when her profile popped up. Not even in a dramatic way, just another face in the stack. But I stopped. It wasn't even that she looked unreal or anything like that. She just looked normal in a way that felt rare on those apps. Messy hair in one photo, oversized hoodie in another, sitting on the floor with a coffee cup in one where the lighting was kinda bad. It didn't look staged. It looked real. And yeah, she was pretty, but not in a way that screamed fake profile. I swiped right without thinking much about it. We matched almost instantly. That should have been the first thing that felt off, but it didn't. I just figured she was on her phone at the same time. We started messaging, and it felt easy, like weirdly easy. She didn't take forever to reply, but she also wasn't glued to the chat. The pace felt normal. She didn't ask anything weird either, just basic stuff. What I did for work, what music I liked, dumb little things. I remember feeling like I got lucky for once. After maybe an hour of talking, she asked for my number. I gave it to her. Again, no hesitation. We moved to texting, and that's when things started getting a little strange, but still not enough for me to stop. She started sending photos. Not like anything bad, just random snaps of her day. One of her sitting on her bed with her laptop, another of her holding a mug, one of her shoes kicked off near a couch. Just casual stuff. It felt normal, like she was trying to make it more real than just texting. I sent a couple back too. Nothing special. Just my desk at work, my car, stuff like that. I work late shifts, so most of this was happening while I was at work. I remember checking my phone during a break when she sent the first photo that actually made me pause. It was a picture of a kitchen. At first glance, it didn't even register. Just a counter, a sink, a kettle. Normal. But something about it stuck in my head. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Then I shrugged it off. A lot of kitchens look the same. I even told myself that while I went back to work. We kept talking. She sent another photo maybe 20 minutes later. This one was of a living room, a couch, a coffee table, a tab on the wall. The lighting looked dim, like it was late afternoon or early evening. Again, nothing crazy. But this time I felt it stronger. That weird feeling like I'd seen it before. I zoomed in on the photo. The table had a scratch in the corner. The couch had this small dent in one of the cushions. I had that exact dent in my couch. I remember just staring at my phone, feeling kind of stupid, like I was trying to convince myself of something that wasn't there. I even opened my camera roll and looked at an old photo I had in my living room. It looked similar, but not exactly the same. I told myself I was reaching. I put my phone away and tried to ignore it. Then she sent another one. This time was a hallway. Narrow, with a coat hanging on a hook, a pair of shoes on the floor near the wall. My chest dropped. Those were my shoes. Not just the same kind. Mine. Same scuffs on the sides, same worn out laces. I didn't even realize I'd stopped breathing for a second. I just sat there staring at it while everything started clicking together in the worst way. I went back to the kitchen photo. Then the living room. I started noticing things I missed before. The exact pattern on the counter. The small chip on the wall near the tea. Stuff I'd never paid attention to until that moment. It was my apartment. Every single photo she sent was taken inside my apartment, while I was at work. I remember checking the time. I still had 2 hours left on my shift. My hands felt cold and I couldn't think straight. I wanted to believe there was some explanation that didn't involve someone being inside my place. Maybe old photos. Maybe she used to live there. That was the only thing that made any sense. I asked her about it. I tried to keep it casual, like I wasn't freaking out. Just mentioned the place looked familiar. Waited for her to say something normal, something that would make it all make sense. Her reply came quick. She said she liked my place. I stared at that message for a long time. I didn't respond. My brain was trying to piece together how that was even possible. I hadn't told her my address. I barely told her anything about where I live except the general area. There was no way she could have found my exact apartment from that. Another photo came through. This one made my stomach drop harder than anything before. It was my bedroom. My bed, unmade exactly how I left it that morning. My jacket thrown over the chair. Even my charger hanging off the side of the nightstand. And in the corner of the photo, barely visible, was the edge of a mirror. And in that mirror, there was movement. Not clear, not detailed, just enough to see that someone was there holding the phone. I left work early. Didn't even explain it properly. Just grabbed my stuff and went. The whole drive back felt wrong, like I was heading towards something I didn't want to see. I kept checking my phone at red lights. More photos kept coming. Bathroom, closet, my front door from the inside. The last one before I got there was the worst. It was taken from my bed, facing the door. Like someone was laying where I slept. When I got to my building, everything looked normal. Lights on in other apartments, nothing out of place. I stood outside my door for a minute, just listening. Nothing. No sound at all. I unlocked it slowly. The inside looked exactly how I left it. Nothing moved. Nothing missing. Nothing broken. I checked every room. Empty. Completely empty. My heart was still racing, but at the same time I felt stupid again. Like I just worked myself up over nothing. Maybe it was some kind of trick. Maybe someone had photos from before I moved in. I didn't know. I went to my room last. Everything looked the same as in the photo. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm down. That's when my phone buzzed again. I looked at it. It was another photo from her. My hands started shaking before I even opened it. It was a picture of me, sitting on my bed, taken from behind. I slowly turned my head toward the closet. The door was slightly open, just enough to see darkness inside. I didn't move for what felt like forever. I couldn't. My body just locked up while my brain tried to catch up with what I was seeing. My phone buzzed again. Another photo. This time closer. Closer to me. Like whoever was in there had stepped out. I didn't check the closet. I grabbed my keys and left. Didn't pack anything, didn't turn anything off. I just walked out and kept walking until I was outside again. I never went back in after that. I stayed at a friend's place for a while. Told him a watered-down version of it because saying the whole thing out loud made it sound insane. I reported it, but nothing came of it. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints they could use, nothing missing. Just photos on my phone that I eventually deleted because I couldn't stand looking at them. Her number stopped working the next day. Profile gone too. Like she never existed. I still don't know how she got in. I changed apartments a month later. New place, new locks, everything. But sometimes when I'm at work late, I still get that feeling. Like if I checked my phone at the wrong moment, there'd be a photo waiting. Taken before I got home. I didn't even notice her the first time, which is what bothers me the most now. It means she was already there and I just didn't see it. It wasn't until the third or fourth time that something clicked, and by then it was already too late to pretend it was nothing. This all started because I ghosted her. Not in a dramatic way. No argument, no weird ending. I just stopped replying. The conversation had slowed down, I lost interest, and instead of explaining that like a normal person, I just left it. She didn't blow up my phone or anything either. Just sent a couple follow-ups over a few days and then stopped. It felt like it ended clean, which made it easier to forget about. And I did forget about her. For a while. The first time I saw her again was in a photo my friend posted. It was just a random group picture from a night out. Nothing important. I wasn't even in it, just scrolling through stories out of boredom. I tapped through without paying much attention. Then I went back. Not because of her. Just because something in the background caught my eye. I paused on the photo. Looked closer. There was a girl standing behind the group, slightly off to the side. Not part of the picture, just there in the background. And she looked familiar. I zoomed in. It took me a second, but then I recognized her. It was the girl I ghosted. Same hair, same face, same expression. Just standing there. I felt this weird jolt, but I laughed it off almost immediately. It wasn't that crazy. People end up in the same places all the time. Same city, same spots. It happens. I checked the location tag on the story. It was a bar I'd been to before, but not recently. So yeah, it made sense. I moved on. Didn't think about it again. Until a few days later. I was scrolling through a random account I follow. Someone I barely know, just added because we had mutuals. They posted a photo at a coffee shop. Again, nothing special. But this time I saw her instantly. In the background. Sitting at a table behind the person taking the picture. Not looking at the camera. Just there. My stomach dropped a little this time. Because this wasn't the same place as before. Completely different part of town. Different day. Different person posting. But she was still there. I checked the date. Posted that morning. I hadn't been anywhere near that area. So it wasn't like she was following me physically. At least that's what I told myself. I zoomed in again. Same face. Same neutral expression. Like she wasn't reacting to anything. Just existing in the background. I clicked off the photo and just sat there for a second, trying to figure out why it felt so wrong. Because logically, it could still be coincidence. Maybe she just went out a lot. Maybe she ended up in the background of people's photos more than usual. It wasn't impossible, but it didn't feel like coincidence. Not anymore. I went back to her profile. It was still there. Same as before. No new posts. No signs that she was doing anything out of the ordinary. If anything, it looked inactive. That made it worse somehow. Because if she wasn't posting, then how was she showing up everywhere else? I tried to ignore it again. Told myself I was overthinking. But then it happened a third time. This one hit harder, because it was closer. The photo was posted by someone I work with. A picture from outside the office building, taken during lunch. I wasn't in it, but I recognized the spot immediately. I zoomed in without even thinking, and there she was, standing across the street, facing the camera. This time, she was looking directly at it, and I swear, it looked like she was smiling slightly. Not a normal smile, just enough to notice. My chest felt tight, because now it wasn't random locations anymore. This was near me, near where I actually go every day. I checked the timestamp. It was from earlier that day. I tried to remember where I was at that time. I had been inside, working. I didn't see her, but she was there, close enough to be in that photo. I started going through more posts, not just from people I know, but random ones too. Searching location tags, scrolling through recent uploads. And once I started looking, I couldn't stop seeing her. Not in every photo, but enough. A park. A street. A store. Always in the background. Always somewhere behind the main subject. And each time, she was closer. Not just physically, but closer to me. Places I go more often. Places I recognized instantly. It felt like a pattern. Like she was moving through these photos step by step. Getting nearer. I stopped going out as much after that. Started staying home more. Because I didn't want to see her in the background of something taken right outside my building. But that didn't help. Because the next time I saw her, it was worse than all the others. It was in a photo I took. I didn't notice it right away. I had taken a picture of my room to send to a friend. Just something random, nothing important. After I sent it, I opened it again to check something. And that's when I saw it. In the reflection of my window. Faint. But clear enough. Her. Standing outside. Looking in. I dropped my phone. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. I went straight to the window. Looked outside. Nothing. Just the street. Empty. I went back to the photo. Zoomed in. She was still there. Same face. Same expression. Closer than ever. I checked the time. I had taken that photo seconds before noticing, which meant she had been there. Right outside. Close enough to be in the reflection. But when I looked, she was gone. I stopped sleeping properly after that. Kept checking every photo I saw online. Looking for her. And she kept appearing. Closer each time. Until it got to the point where I didn't need to search anymore. Because she showed up in something else. A live video. Someone streaming from a street near mine. I clicked on it without thinking. Watched for a few seconds. Normal stuff. People walking by. Cars passing. And then I saw her, walking in the background. Not standing still this time. Moving toward the camera. Toward wherever the person was filming. I closed the app instantly. My hands were shaking. Because now it wasn't just photos. It was real time. I didn't open anything for hours after that. Just sat there, trying to convince myself it wasn't what I thought. But deep down I knew. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. It was something else. Something that started the moment I ignored her. My phone buzzed later that night. I didn't want to check it, but I did anyway. It was a notification. Someone had tagged me in a photo. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. When I finally did, I felt that same drop in my chest. Because this time, she wasn't in the background. She was right behind me. Close enough that if I had turned around, I would have seen her. But I didn't remember that moment at all. I don't remember anyone being there. I just remember taking that photo earlier that day. Alone. Her profile was minimal, just a single photo that was too dark to make out much, and a short bio that said she liked nighttime walks and coffee at unusual hours. From the start, she refused to meet during the day. Every suggestion I made for coffee or lunch, she declined politely but firmly, insisting that she only went out after dark. At first, I thought it was quirky, maybe some work schedule or weird sleep pattern, but as the dates kept being pushed later and later, a little unease started to creep in. The messages were normal enough, nothing threatening. She asked questions about my life, my habits, my favorite late-night food spots. We traded photos of streets lit by neon signs, empty sidewalks, glowing coffee cups, and the occasional blurry night sky. There was something oddly magnetic about her tone, like she was seeing me in ways that no one else had before. I knew it was dangerous. I knew I should probably stop, but curiosity and that weird excitement of something forbidden kept me agreeing to meet her. We finally arranged to meet up at a park around 11 at night. I remember arriving first, circling the empty lot of the small park with streetlights flickering, the wind carrying a sharp chill. She was already there, or maybe she appeared out of nowhere, standing near a fountain that was more concrete than flowing water, shrouded in shadows. The first thing I noticed was that she didn't blink. Her eyes stayed fixed on mine the entire time I approached, unblinking, unflinching. It was impossible not to feel exposed under that gaze. We walked slowly along the park's winding paths. She moved gracefully, like she belonged there, like the darkness was an extension of her. I couldn't stop staring, and at some point I realized she had no reflection in the puddles scattered along the asphalt. I laughed nervously, thinking it was a trick of the streetlights or maybe my imagination. I stared at her as she reached for her coffee thermos, and the reflection in the water stayed empty. We kept walking. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, at least at first. The park had the quiet of a city asleep, only the occasional distant hum of a car or the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then I saw it. I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in the puddle, and it wasn't there. It wasn't that it looked blurry or faint. It was like the puddle had no knowledge that I existed at all. I froze. She stopped a few steps ahead, turning slightly to watch me. No blink, no change, no expression I could read. Panic started bubbling up, but somehow my feet kept moving, drawing me closer to her as if I had no control. I checked the fountain. Still nothing. Not her, not me. Everything else in the park reflected normally, the streetlights, the trees, the empty benches, but not us. I tried to speak, but my voice felt heavy, like it weighed more than my lungs could carry. She tilted her head slightly, and for the first time, she smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. It was a knowing smile, like she had been waiting for this moment, and I was supposed to understand something I couldn't. The walk continued, and I noticed more details I had ignored before. The way shadows bent differently around her, the way the night felt thicker, like the air itself was trying to pull me into her orbit. It was disorienting. Every streetlight seemed dimmer when she passed. Every reflection that should have existed stayed empty. The panic grew, but there was a strange calm too, a trance-like pull that made it impossible to look away. We stopped at a small bridge. She leaned on the railing and stared down at the water below. No reflection. I forced myself to look into the river, half expecting to see some distortion of myself, some confirmation that I was still here in the physical world. Nothing. The water was clear, smooth, unbroken, empty of me. I tried touching the water. The coldness bit into my fingers, but still no reflection. My panic started turning into terror, but a terrifying curiosity held me there, frozen in place like a moth in front of a flame. The night seemed to stretch, minutes turning into hours. Every step I took beside her felt like a slow erasure. My reflection was gone not just in water, but in the shop windows we passed, and the car mirrors parked along empty streets. She was always just ahead, her smile constant, unwavering. I felt my grip on reality loosening. The city lights flickered, and I realized I couldn't remember what color my hair had been or the exact shape of my hands. The more I focused on her, the more I felt myself melting into the darkness, becoming part of her world. We stopped finally at the edge of an empty plaza. She faced me fully now, close enough that I could see every detail of her unblinking eyes, every subtle movement in her posture, but nothing reflected me back. My stomach churned. I felt hollowed out, as if the world itself was refusing to acknowledge me. She reached out, and instinctively I reached back. The moment our fingers brushed, a strange warmth passed through me, but it wasn't comforting. It was consuming. Time lost meaning. I couldn't tell if we were standing there for seconds or hours. The lights above us flickered, and every shadow seemed to whisper and shift. She smiled, and I felt a pull. I was being drawn into her shape, into her absence. My skin prickled, my thoughts scattered, and I realized that I wasn't just not reflecting. I was becoming like her. Part of the darkness, part of the night itself. Later, when I remember the walk back, it's hazy. The empty streets, the silent bridges, the way the city seemed to fold around us like a blanket. Nothing left a trace of me. No puddles, no mirrors, no windows. I glanced at my phone and the screen reflected only darkness. The screen illuminated my face briefly, but even then it felt wrong. She was always there, always just beyond my peripheral vision, pulling me further into the world she occupied. I got home eventually, though I don't remember the exact moment. The apartment felt different, alien. My reflection was gone in every mirror, even the ones in the bathroom that used to greet me every morning. The glow from my computer, from the little lead strip I had set up along the ceiling, cast shadows, but none of them carried my shape. It was as if I had never been, as if my existence had been rewritten. Sleep didn't help. In dreams, she appeared constantly, leading me through streets I had never walked, cities I had never known. Each time I tried to touch my reflection in the surfaces we passed, and each time nothing came back. I woke up with a hollow sensation in my chest, a gnawing awareness that I wasn't entirely there anymore. I still moved, still spoke, still tried to live a normal life, but everywhere I went my reflection was gone. Friends started asking questions. They noticed oddities, why I never showed up in photos, why group selfies always had a blank space where I should be. I laughed it off, made excuses, but inside, panic bubbled. I could feel the darkness of that night following me, creeping in around edges, waiting for the moment I'd fully dissolve into it. I don't go out at night anymore. I avoid mirrors, reflective surfaces, water, anything that could remind me of the person I used to be. But even in daylight, in the safest places, I can feel her presence. The pull. The subtle tug at the edges of myself. Sometimes I catch a shadow out of the corner of my eye, standing a few feet away, unblinking, and I know it's her. Guiding me, drawing me closer. Every time, I realize a little more of me is gone, replaced with absence, replaced with night. The last thing I remember clearly is standing in front of a puddle, trying to see myself, and only seeing darkness. A deep, solid, empty black. And her just beyond me, smiling, unblinking, patient. Honestly, I was tired of swiping through faces that looked nothing like the photos. Her profile was simple, messy bun, oversized hoodie, cluttered bookshelf in the background. The bio said she loved animals and long walks. Nothing alarming, nothing unusual. Her messages were funny and casual, not over the top, so I matched with her without thinking too much. We set up a date at a small bistro in a part of the city I didn't normally go to. The place was dim, candles on each table, a faint smell of garlic and basil lingering. She arrived on time, wearing a vintage leather jacket and carrying a bag that looked heavy, like it had been living a life of its own. The first thing I noticed was her smile. It wasn't just polite, it was like she was genuinely excited to be there. We sat, ordered coffee, talked about movies, music, life stuff, normal first date things. It was easy too easy. I started thinking maybe the app actually worked for once. Then she leaned over, whispering, or at least I thought she did, and said she needed to introduce me to someone. I laughed nervously, thinking it was a friend she had brought along, but the moment she pulled the zipper on her bag, I froze. Inside was a fully grown raccoon. It had a black mask across its eyes and tiny, dexterous hands clutching the edge of the bag. It blinked at me and chattered in a way that sounded almost like words. She explained casually that the raccoon lived with her, had been rescued from somewhere she wouldn't specify, and it insisted on being part of every conversation. I laughed awkwardly at first, thinking she was joking, but then the raccoon climbed out of the bag and settled in the chair opposite me, tail flicking, eyes sharp. It started making little noises whenever I spoke, moving closer when I got animated, retreating when I paused. She seemed completely normal with this. She handed it a tiny espresso cup, which it ignored, and it began chattering again, almost conversationally, like it was contributing opinions to the date. The night progressed, and I realized I couldn't escape its presence. At first, I tried pretending it wasn't there, focusing on her, thinking maybe it would calm down. But it didn't. It followed our every movement, mimicked gestures, occasionally knocking over utensils just to remind me it was there. People at other tables glanced, some whispered, but she acted like it was normal. She introduced me to it by name, explained its favorite foods, its quirks, even its opinions about certain movies. She treated it like a roommate, a friend, a fully sentient member of her household, which in hindsight, it probably was. After dinner, we walked through a park nearby. She carried a small backpack that seemed impossibly light for holding a full-grown raccoon. I assumed it was in there, but then it scampered ahead of us, leaping from branch to branch in trees along the path, eyes fixed on me, tail flicking like it was judging. She laughed at my startled reaction, completely unbothered. She talked about her life as if this raccoon had always been there, and maybe in a way it had. Every story, every past event, seemed to include the animal as if it had been shaping her choices, her personality, her entire world. The thing that got under my skin wasn't the raccoon itself. It was how much attention it demanded, how aware it seemed of me, how it seemed to notice the smallest expressions, the tiniest changes in tone. When I smiled, it smiled back, too deliberately. When I tried to gesture or explain something, it interrupted with a chittering noise that almost sounded like commentary. It was too intentional. I kept thinking maybe I was imagining the intelligence behind its movements, but the way it mirrored my posture, the timing of its noises, made it impossible to ignore. We eventually ended up at her apartment. The door opened, and the raccoon bolted inside like it owned the place, leaping onto the counter, inspecting the fridge, knocking over mugs like a tiny inspector. The apartment was a mix of cozy clutter and organized chaos, piles of books, scattered clothes, half-finished art projects, but every area seemed designed for the raccoon's comfort as much as hers. There were small hammocks, tiny shelves, even a little blanket nest that looked absurdly plush for an animal of its size. She moved around it like it was an extension of her body, reaching over it, adjusting things, apologizing if it got in my way like it was her main priority. I sat on the couch, trying to process everything. She brought over a blanket for me, which the raccoon immediately claimed, sitting on my lap, paws kneading gently. I froze, heart racing. She apologized, laughing softly, explaining it had a habit of bonding with new people quickly. I nodded, trying to act casual, but my mind was racing. This was not what I had signed up for. Yet at the same time, she was magnetic, the raccoon a bizarre sort of charm, and I couldn't leave without seeming rude or freaked out. The night dragged on. The raccoon became increasingly vocal, chattering, occasionally tugging at my sleeves, sniffing my hair, nudging me toward the couch cushions or food items. She fed it little snacks, which it accepted with dignity, then returned to staring at me like it was evaluating. She told stories about its early life, rescue attempts, how it had adapted to living with humans, all while the raccoon made noises of agreement or dissent at the appropriate moments. It was uncanny. More than once, I caught myself thinking it understood every word I said. By the time I left, I was exhausted, not just tired, but drained, like the raccoon had consumed more than my attention, It had consumed my mental space, my comfort zone. She walked me to the door, raccoon perched on her shoulder, tail curling around her neck. She waved, laughing, promising to text soon. I nodded, stepped out, and immediately felt the quiet of the street without the chittering presence. It was relief, but also a hollow sort of unease, as if part of me had left behind something I didn't understand. Over the next few days, I tried to contact her, but my messages went unanswered. I checked the app, hoping maybe we could set up another date, but the profile was gone, deleted, vanished. I thought maybe I'd imagined everything. But then small things started happening. Shadows flickered in the corner of my vision. Noises in the apartment building, scratches, faint chittering, though no one else lived above or below me. I would dream of raccoon eyes staring at me from dark corners, tail flicking, paws moving as if mimicking my gestures. Eventually, I stopped using the app, stopped dating entirely. The image of her in that raccoon stayed with me, persistent and impossible to shake. Sometimes, in the quiet of my apartment, I could swear I heard a soft chittering, just on the edge of hearing, almost like a reminder. She and the raccoon existed, somewhere, maybe watching, maybe judging, maybe waiting for the next conversation, the next date, the next person to test its uncanny presence. I never got a clear explanation of why she lived with a fully grown raccoon, why it seemed so aware, why it demanded participation. But I realized quickly that it wasn't about logic. It was about the way she and that animal operated together, a symbiosis that left anyone new feeling off balance, watched, and somehow complicit in the strange world. Now, even months later, I can't look at raccoons the same way. The images online, the videos of them climbing garbage cans, their tiny hands and masked faces, it all triggers a memory of that date. I can't shake the way it moved, how it seemed to follow my thoughts, how it made me aware of my own reactions like a mirror with claws. Dating apps feel dangerous in a way I never understood, and every time my phone buzzes with a new match, I hesitate, thinking about the pair of eyes that had silently judged me over coffee, over dinner, over a night I can't unsee. The world suddenly felt smaller after that night. It was a presence, a measuring stick for reality, and the fact that I had survived the date intact felt like luck more than skill. The first time I saw the photo, I thought it was a joke someone made using my pictures. Like one of those fake couple edits people do when they're bored. I almost laughed when I saw it, because it looked convincing at first glance, but the more I stared at it, the less funny it got. It was me, standing next to her, both of us smiling like we'd known each other for a while. And the worst part was, it looked completely normal. Not edited, not stitched together, not anything like that. The lighting matched, the shadows matched, even the way my arm was positioned looked natural, like I'd actually been there. But I hadn't. I hadn't even met her yet. I matched with her 2 days before that. Her profile stood out because it was almost empty. Barely any photos, no linked accounts, nothing flashy. Her bio was just a couple lines about how she didn't like social media and preferred real conversations. That's what made me swipe. It felt different from everyone else trying too hard. We started talking, and she actually stuck to that. She didn't bring up followers or apps or anything like that. If anything, she seemed almost annoyed by it. She said she didn't post much and didn't really care about that stuff. So seeing that photo made no sense. I found it by accident. One of my friends sent me a screenshot late at night, asking if I had a girlfriend I forgot to mention. I opened it expecting something dumb, but then I saw it. Her account. Public. And right at the top was that photo. The caption made it worse. It described a day we hadn't had yet. Walking through a part of town I recognized, grabbing food from a place I go to sometimes, sitting somewhere with a view. It was detailed. Too detailed. Like it was written after the fact, not made up. I went straight to her profile from the app. She hadn't mentioned it at all. Our messages were still normal, talking about meeting up later that week. Nothing weird. I clicked on her social account again. There were more photos. Not just that one. A few others. All of us together, in different places. One of us sitting outside a cafe. One of us walking down a street at night. One where I was looking at her instead of the camera, like someone caught a moment. I checked the dates. They were all posted earlier that day, before I even woke up. I felt this weird mix of confusion and something heavier I couldn't explain. Like my brain was trying to reject what I was seeing, but couldn't find a reason to. I opened one of the photos and zoomed in. It wasn't just me standing there. It was me doing specific things. In one of them, I was holding a drink I always order. In another, I was wearing a jacket I actually own. Even the way my hair looked was accurate for that day. It wasn't random. It matched real details. I went back to our chat. Nothing about any of this. No mention of photos. No hint that she even used social media. I asked her about it. Kept it simple. Tried not to sound like I was freaking out. She replied after a few minutes. And what she said didn't help. She didn't deny it. She just said she doesn't really use it much. Like that explained anything. I stared at my phone for a while after that. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I kept scrolling her account. Older posts. That's when it got worse. There were photos of her with other guys. Same style. Same kind of captions. Like full days documented. But something about them felt off. I clicked into one. The guy looked normal. But when I looked closer, his face felt wrong. Not distorted. Just slightly off in a way I couldn't place. Like it was close to real but not fully there. I went to another post. Different guy. Same feeling. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the background of one of those photos, there was a place I recognized. Not from her posts. From real life. A spot near where I live. Not common landmark either. Just a random street corner. I checked the date on that post. It was from weeks ago. Before I even matched with her. I went back to our messages again. Read through everything more carefully this time. Looking for anything I missed. There were small things. Tiny details she mentioned about places she liked. They matched the photos. But at the time, they didn't stand out. Now they did. It felt like she already had a timeline. Like everything was planned before I was even part of it. My phone buzzed. Another message from her. This time, she sent a photo. Not from her account. Directly to me. It was another picture of us. Different from the ones I'd seen. This one looked like it was taken indoors. Maybe an apartment. I was sitting on a couch. She was next to me. Both of us looking at something off camera. It looked casual. Real. Like it wasn't posed. I dropped my phone on the bed for a second. Just stared at it. Then picked it up again. Zoomed in. Everything looked consistent. No signs of editing. No weird edges. Nothing. I checked the background. I recognized the room. Not exactly, but it looked like a layout similar to my place. That made my chest tighten. I stood up and looked around my room. Everything was normal. But now I couldn't stop comparing it to the photo. Trying to find matches. Angles. Details. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Another photo. This one was outside. Same street as one of her posts. Me walking next to her. Mid-step. Like it was taken without me noticing. I started feeling like I was falling behind something. Like there was a version of events happening somewhere that I wasn't part of yet. And somehow it was already documented. I checked the time. It wasn't even the day we were supposed to meet yet. That's when I looked back at the captions on our posts. The one from earlier. The one describing the day we hadn't had. I read it again. Slower this time. And I realized something. It wasn't just describing random things. It was describing a plan. Specific places. Specific order. Like a schedule. I opened my Maps app. Looked at the locations she mentioned. They were all real. And all close enough to actually do in one day. My heart started racing again, but this time it felt different. Less confusion. More like I understood what was going on, just not how. It felt like she already knew how the day would go. Like it already happened somewhere. And the photos were proof of that version. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to open it, but I did. Another message. No text. Just a photo. This one was taken at night. The last place mentioned in her caption. Me standing under a streetlight. Looking straight at the camera. My expression looked tired. Like it was the end of a long day. I stared at it for a long time. because something about it felt different from the others. It didn't feel like a happy photo. It felt like the end of something. I checked the timestamp. Posted a few minutes ago. I hadn't even met her yet. I closed the app. Sat there for a while. Then I opened our chat again. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't know what to say, because it felt like anything I typed was already part of that timeline somewhere. I locked my phone instead, set it down, and just sat there, trying to decide if I should still meet her, because part of me felt like I didn't have a choice. Like that day was already set, already posted, already real somewhere. My phone buzzed one more time. I didn't check it. I already knew it would be another photo, probably one I hadn't lived yet. His profile seemed like the usual, decent photos, vaguely funny captions, the kind that promised charm without being overwhelming. When he messaged me, his words were casual, easy to read, and I liked that he didn't overthink responses. After a few days of chatting, he suggested we meet for coffee at a small cafe he liked downtown. I figured it would be normal, low pressure, and agreed. The cafe was dim but cozy, with exposed brick walls and mismatched furniture. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with a half-empty cup of coffee, scrolling on his phone. He stood up, smiled, and gestured for me to sit. At first, everything felt normal. He was polite, attentive, and surprisingly witty in person. He asked questions, laughed at my jokes, and didn't seem pushy about anything. I started relaxing, thinking this might actually go well. After about an hour of chatting, he suggested we take a walk. It was spring, the streets wet from an afternoon drizzle, the smell of asphalt and blooming flowers mixing in the air. He said he wanted to show me something unique, a place he discovered years ago. It sounded harmless enough, just a short walk away. I followed, not noticing how quiet the streets had become, the occasional passerby giving us sideways glances. We arrived at a narrow, unmarked door tucked between two older buildings. He unlocked it with a key he kept on a chain around his neck, and we stepped inside. The interior was dark, musty, and surprisingly large. Walls lined with shelves and display cases, the floor covered with worn rugs that muffled our footsteps. I assumed it was some private gallery or collector's room. He smiled, telling me he loved oddities and personal collections. I didn't think much of it at first. Then he started showing me around, pointing to small boxes, jars, even picture frames. At first, the items seemed harmless. Trinkets, jewelry, small souvenirs. Then I noticed tiny notes attached to each item, written in meticulous handwriting. The notes weren't about history or origin. They described people. My stomach sank when I realized the notes weren't generic. They were detailed observations, psychological notes about habits, reactions, emotional triggers. He explained he liked to study people to understand them. He emphasized that he kept these collections from previous dates, each labeled with a date, a location, and the person's name. I froze. Every trinket, every note, every little item belonged to someone he had dated, observed, and cataloged. He wasn't showing me a quirky collection. He was showing me evidence of obsession, methodical tracking of every interaction. My mind raced. The polite man I had met at the cafe was someone entirely different here, someone meticulous and detached, someone who had spent years documenting people's lives in ways that were deeply personal and invasive. He walked me past rows of shelves, wallets, watches, earrings, even clothing items, all carefully displayed. The notes were unsettling. He described reactions, moods, what people revealed in conversations, weaknesses, things they never told anyone. The handwriting was neat, almost clinical, yet the content was intimate and disturbing. My pulse quickened, my hands shook slightly as I realized how organized and obsessive this was. He noticed my discomfort but didn't stop. Instead, he smiled wider and said it was part of the experience, that he liked to see how people reacted when confronted with the reality of being observed, analyzed, cataloged. He explained that some of the notes were written after years of following people online and offline, sometimes months of subtle interaction before an item ended up in his museum. I tried to keep calm, thinking maybe I could leave, but the room was more like a labyrinth than a single space. Hallways of shelves stretched out in angles that didn't make sense, creating corners I hadn't noticed. Every turn revealed more items, more notes, more evidence of meticulous tracking. It was overwhelming. The thought of how many people he had studied, how carefully he had documented them, made my head spin. He guided me to a small room at the back, the lighting dimmer, the air heavier. In this room, the collections were more personal. Handwritten letters, personal keepsakes, even photos taken discreetly. He told me he kept this room for the most interesting personalities, the ones who challenged him, made him think differently. As he spoke, I felt like I was being evaluated, analyzed, a new subject in a room of ghosts and remnants. My phone was in my bag back in the cafe room, out of reach. He explained that he preferred in-person observation, that the devices people carried could distort reality. I realized then that I was trapped in the museum, both physically and psychologically. Each object, each note was a reminder that I could be next, that my reactions, habits, and even subtle expressions would be documented and cataloged. He showed me one last section, the most meticulously arranged. Items lined up like trophies, each tagged with dates, names, and a paragraph of psychological insight. I could feel my pulse in my ears as I understood that I had been lured into this space, not just for a date, but as part of an ongoing collection. The casual charm, the laughter, the easy conversation, it had all been a prelude to this revelation. The walls seemed to close in as he talked, detailing patterns, behaviors, and tendencies. My mind raced with questions about consent, about privacy, about how many people had walked into this museum unknowingly. He explained that the museum was his way of studying humanity, of understanding connections, of feeling control. The casual explanation did nothing to ease the dread that filled me. I needed to leave. I told myself it was enough, that this was the end of the date. He didn't resist, but watched me carefully as I made my way toward the exit. The hallways twisted, the floor uneven, and it felt like the museum was alive, breathing, observing my every step. Finally, I reached the door, stepped out into the damp street, and didn't look back. The city was quiet, too quiet, streets empty in ways that felt staged. I walked home fast, trying to shake off the sensation that someone was cataloging my every movement. The museum stayed in my mind, a vivid, invasive image, rows of shelves filled with reminders of people's private lives, meticulously labeled, stored, and studied. Even days later, I couldn't stop thinking about the objects, the notes, the man who collected them. Every time I saw someone leaving a cafe, or a couple holding hands, or a backpack left unattended, my mind drew connections to the museum. The idea of charm masking obsession, of a dating profile leading to a personal archive of someone's life, made every swipe online feel dangerous. I deleted the app after that, avoiding casual interactions, avoiding strangers who seemed perfect. The memory of the museum, of that carefully curated collection, is permanent. I think about the people who never realized they were studied, whose items now sit behind glass in a dim room somewhere, and the man who made that possible still walks around, charming, polite, harmless in public. It terrifies me, the thought that anyone who seems normal could be part of something structured, obsessive, and deeply personal. And I can't stop thinking that maybe the next person he targets, the next item in his museum, could be anyone, including someone I know.